So when you're learning something new, whether it be with the videos, which can be very entertaining, or with it in front of an instructor, sometimes that information sounds really good right then. It makes sense at that moment in time. But you have to ask yourself, do you remember that information a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? So a lot of times that answer is simply no. And that comes from my personal experience, as well as I see it a lot of times with students. They're like, oh, I remember that, I get that. And you try to get them to recall that information, and it becomes quite challenging. So just because we hear something once doesn't mean that we retain that information. You got to think that your mind is processing tons of information constantly. You're visually inputting all this information, everything that you see. When you're driving, all the billboards, the television, your phone, all this information being bombarded into your brain. As well as we're hearing stuff. We're hearing the radio, we're hearing conversations, we're hearing advertisements, we're hearing music, we're hearing all this information. So if you see something new that you're trying to learn, you're getting about this much of that information. And your brain's trying to process what should we keep and what should we throw away. At the end of the day, it's dumping tons of information. So you got to think, how can I get this information I want to keep staying long term where your brain doesn't dump it? So I have several key components here that I want to share with you that I really wish was shared with me early on that's helped me tremendously in learning. I also apply this to several of my students that have trouble learning, and it really makes a huge difference for those who actually follow these steps. Now me personally, I have a few learning disabilities such as being dyslexic and also ADD, and so some of these things here have been a challenging for me, but also I use these to help other people learn as well. So here's some steps that I think will really make a difference. And one of those big steps is writing stuff down is a proven learning tool. It actually makes your mind process more than once. You have to see or hear it, then you have to think about it, then you have to use it into motion, and you're having to write it back out. So you have to actually think about it slow enough to actually put it into words. It's very powerful. Just simply writing information down is huge. So when you're seeing these videos, or you're in class, whatever it is, and you're seeing this new information, start to write stuff down. But don't try to write down every single thing somebody's saying. You really want to write down key notes, vocabulary words. And even if you don't get the definition of writing that vocabulary word down, you can look the word up again later. What's cool about these videos is you can actually pause it and write that information down as you go. But writing that down is key. Now for me, writing it down, I have all this words and all this text on a page, it doesn't fully help me. So one of the things that I've found comes in really handy is different color pens. I can write different stuff down. Now I have some friends of mine that like to take that a step further. They write vocabulary words in one color and another topic and all these different colors. For me, what really helps is just simply changing up the colors. When I'm looking on this paper, instead of all the words blending in together, I'm seeing the different colors, I'm seeing the different lines. So now we got the powerful of writing it down. It makes our brain stop and think about it. It has to process it in the motion. Then we have the different color text that allows it to stand out. Also what I like to do is have two different notebooks. I write down all of my notes that I can remember right then. Then at the night, if I'm taking a class or a conference class, I take all of my notes and I like to transfer that information from one page to another or from one notebook to another notebook. What's really great about this is I'm writing that information down again. It also has some of the gaps where I didn't get everything they said. So I can actually look up that information and add in those gaps. So it's causing me to think again, as well as it's getting me to think about other points. I may have a question. I don't really understand this concept, or how would this affect it? So I'll write down the question and leave a blank in my new notebook. So that way the next day, or when I get a chance, I can follow up with somebody or look the information up myself and start filling in those gaps. That's building some of that critical thinking, and it's so very important. Another thing, with HVAC, we have tons and tons and tons of vocabulary words and abbreviations. HVAC itself is an abbreviation. We have the second most abbreviations to the US military. So words are going to be very important. So what I like to do is take and make my own flashcards. You can cut it up into paper, or you can go buy those little index cards. Put the vocabulary word on the front side, and on the back side, write down what the definition is. I've had a lot of students say, Ty, it's the new technology, the new age. But I tell you, that importance of writing it down is huge. Now, if you want to get to the new age, take those flashcards and take a picture of the front side, take a picture of the back side, and after you've written them down, you can have them all on your phone digitally. You can swap over, see the question, swap over, and see what the vocabulary word is, or vice versa. A lot of people, they have families now. A great way to study is if your child is old enough, have them study with you in front of those flashcards. You're doing two things. One is you're teaching your child how to study, as well as you don't want to get it wrong in front of your child. But another important thing is you're spending time with your child. So when you're helping them learn, and they're also helping you learn, it's that extra little pressure to make sure you get these words right. Sometimes people study with their spouse, if your spouse is into it. My spouse is probably getting tired of HVAC at this point, but she's a trooper. So very important to keep applying that. Just because you saw that information once isn't enough. You need to write it down. You need to see it again. Another really important thing to do is quiz yourself. Go back through, make sure you're understanding that. And go back through, rewatch the video, rewatch those key points. Ask your instructor, hey, what's going on with this? I really want to understand that. It's very important to follow back up with that. Another thing you got to be careful of is just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's always right. I found out that many times something that I was taught incorrectly, and I had to go learn the correct way. And sometimes that's kind of painful. And sometimes you'll see people disagree. I have some very good friends and very intelligent friends in HVAC, and we disagree on some of the little minor things, but overall, our guides and our ideas are the same direction. One of the things I love to do is have debates with the people in the industry. I love to talk about different ideas, and sometimes I change my mind and sometimes other people change theirs, but having that communication is very important. You don't see us getting mad at each other. You see us communicating, we're learning, we're bettering each other. So it's very important steps. Now, another thing that's going to be real important is when you are studying, you want to make sure you have some water with you and have some snacks with you so you can keep the mind working, keep everything going, keep those juices flowing in there. It's very important. Dehydration, your brain doesn't process and store information as well when you're dehydrated. So make sure you have some food and snacks with you when you're studying. For me personally, I have to study in a very quiet location. So sometimes I drive out to the desert or the forest or the beach or go to a nice little local pub, whatever it takes so I can get away from everybody and have the quiet where I can actually focus on what I need to do. Other people can study right in the middle of 1,000 different things going on, and that's great. Find out what works for you and write it down and review that information constantly. Now, one more thing we need to talk about, and this is very important, is going to be resources. You need to have these resources because you can't remember everything. You need to go back and reference it. My newest friend, Craig Malasio with AC Service Tech, he's got some great videos, and he's written his own book. He actually has a really cool, quick reference guide. So if you want to see about getting into air conditioning quickly, vocabulary is very quickly, getting down into that, what you're going to need directly in the field is a nice book that focuses on what you need to know massively in the field directly right off the bat. He's also put together a super awesome workbook. So now it's actually making you think. You're having to go and write down that information. You're getting to test yourself, which is hugely important. You got to test yourself. You got to make sure, am I retaining this information and can I regurgitate this information when I need? You're not going to go to the service van and be like, oh yeah, that whatchamacallit. Well, if everything was a whatchamacallit, what would we need? So they're going to say, I need you to get this component. You got to know what that component is. When you're talking to a customer, you don't get to ask, hey, what's wrong with the unit? Is it A, the blower motor, B, the compressor? You need to be able to have these vocabulary words and communicate these words to people. So Craig has some really awesome videos, got a really cool course and some nice little quick reference guides. He gave me this book. I've been flipping through it. It's really awesome, really love it. There's many other books that we have. One is this one. What I like about this book is it's got some really great picture text in it. I haven't actually read through this whole book yet. I use it for a reference guide. I haven't had a school that we taught from this book yet, but it's pretty interesting. I like to use it. It's a great reference guide. Another one of my favorite books is this book right here, and it's written by Carter Stanfield, and Carter is a fantastic guy. I quiz him all the time. He is one of my go-to people. I don't know information. I want to understand something. He always makes time and answers these questions for me. So we have the AHRI Fundamentals of HVACR. It's a really well-written book. It's got tons and tons of really great information in there. Can't go wrong with that either. As well as I got the Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Technology book. This one's by Eugene Stoberstein, and Eugene is fantastic. If you have a chance to visit one of his classes, he's very dynamic. He was also kind enough to autograph my book for me, so thank you Eugene for that. I've taught with both of these books before. All of these books have a different method of delivering information. They start at one point and they have a series of how the information flows best for them, or how they think it would flow best. As long as you have some kind of a book to get started with and you're flowing through and following information, that's what's going to be important. You can't learn all this information right away. But over time, seeing it again, it's going to be important. And also, you can't be afraid to read. You're going to be reading service manuals. And the more that you read these books, even if it doesn't make sense, for me myself, I have to read something 2 or 3 times sometimes before I get it. And for me, what really helps is the highlighters. I can highlight different information. Don't just highlight the whole text. I've had students that highlighted every single word. That doesn't do you any good. Find key points of information and highlight them. And that highlighting it makes it stand out. Another thing that works really well for me is I'm searching for information. I may be looking for this much information, but read and learn this much. That way, for me, it makes it where I can digest this information. What's really nice too is in these books, they have questions at the back of each of these chapters. You can go through and use one color just for the answers for those questions, and now you're highlighting specific information. As you're going back and seeing my videos, your instructors' videos, anybody else's videos, you can go back through and find out where that is in this book, and you start saying, oh, he talked about that. And you'll see that a lot of people, oh, I don't like that book stuff. It's the same thing. This is one form of communication, just like you're watching me now is another form of communication, as well as you're working with somebody in the field doing it. It's another form of communication. It's all communication, but being able to go through and find that information and resource it is going to be really, really essential. Take your time, go through and use highlighters, use different colors, and let that information work with you, reference it. And you're going to be working with a lot of installation manuals, and we call this RTFM, Read the Fabulous Manual. This is from Brian Oler. It's really well worded to make sure that we can see this information. And Brian's really good at putting short pieces of information together to where you can understand little bits of information, but it still comes from all the books, all the same information. We're not inventing new stuff. We're just finding new ways of delivering this information. But when you read installation manuals, tons of information. So a lot of people say, oh, I don't like to read those manuals. I don't understand it. The more that you read this stuff, even if you don't understand everything, that's okay. The more that you read it, the more you get familiar with it. And trust me, I'm a guy that does not like to sit down and read. I haven't sat down and read any one of these books, but I've gone through the majority of them being able to look for information, reading a section, reading a chapter, refreshing it. And just because I think I know a lot of stuff, I'll reread a chapter and realize that I interpreted something incorrectly, or maybe the information is now changed. So read, write, and practice. One more little thing. Now I always tell my students, number one, know the answer. Number two, know where to find it. And these resources are important. One great thing you have now is you have this resource right here. But you got to be careful. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that's really bad, and a lot of YouTube videos that are even worse. Some of the stuff is really, really scary what's being put out there. So find yourself a reputable source. I have tons of resources that I fall back to. And people ask me, do you know all this stuff? Well, absolutely not. But I do know where to find this information. What's cool is I got some of these books here that date really far back. This is from 1936. These same applications, this same theory still applies. This one from 1933. This information is still relevant today. Some of our processes, some of our ideas, some of our methods have changed significantly, but the still basic concepts are right here. These books, all these books have tons of valuable information. One book may make sense to me, and another book may not. But on a different subject, one may speak to me better. What's important is if you see something you don't understand, use that as a driving force. Hey, I don't get that. I don't understand that. Let me reach out and find another way to explain it. I have one method of explaining stuff, but you're going to find that my method may not be the best way for you. Maybe you can reach out to me, and if I have time, I'll put together another method, another way of reaching somebody. There's also, I have several friends in the industry that have tons of resources and different ways of explaining stuff themselves. I'll post those links below this video, and hopefully that will help you learn to be successful. But I like to keep these resources, keep them so I can reference them. So these are some of the books that I have, my most favorite books. I have even more that's still in boxes. And on this side, I have tons of information, some manuals, service manuals, new data sheets that come out. Some of them are papers that don't really fit well in a folder, so I've put them in these hanging folders, as well as tons of digital data. But I have found a little bit of an issue with digital data. I like to have digital data because there's so much stuff that I can keep right here in my phone, such as the Mitsubishi systems. I can have every information I need with their MyLink drive. But sometimes you'll find that you just can't find where you left that information. You'll download a whole bunch of PDFs and you forget where they're at, or you can't remember what the name of that PDF was. One thing I recommend doing is making you a separate folder on your phone and saving those PDFs in that folder. If you're going to take a picture of information, take a picture of information and save it in that HVAC folder so you can find it later. Eventually, you're going to need to make subfolders. Gas heating, maybe different brands, heat pumps, whatever it is, you're going to divide that up so you can find that information. So I've found that I have so much of this digital data that a lot of times it even makes it harder to find it, which is why I like to be able to go back to my books, my reference. I have these divided up between gas heating, heat pumps, all these different resources that I can reference and find. No, I don't know all this information, but I know where to find it, and if I still don't know it there, I also know who else I can call. But start gathering up this information, start learning it, building your own library. I'm not the guy that sits down and reads, but I love to be able to have that information to find it. What you're going to find is you just keep asking people for the answer. You're at the mercy of what they tell you. They could tell you anything that they want. Unfortunately, we spend 10% of our lives learning and 90% defending what we think that we know. So spend more of your time learning. When you talk to somebody and you get an idea, think, I wonder how that works. As you go through and learn more about HVAC, let your curiosity guide you. Be curious about something, look it up. Don't just let somebody ask a question, let that be the end of it. Also, don't just find what the question you're looking for. Find why, how does that work? And if you understand how something works and why it works, that's going to take you so much further. So it's going to take you time to build these resources up. But over time, you're going to be doing it. You're going to be taking more and more classes. You're going to be learning how to get that information digitally and also saving it. You a lot of times see information that's really important, so you'll take a picture of it. Maybe it's a supply house, maybe on a unit. But once you take a picture of it, also write that down and add that to your database, because that physically writing it down is going to help you learn. And what's most important is to never stop learning. If you run into somebody and they say they already know all this stuff, you don't walk away from them. Run, because you can't learn all this stuff. I'm still learning so much stuff, and the people that I go to, they'll tell you the same thing. Hey, I'm still learning this stuff, because there's so much information and it's growing constantly. That's what I love about this trade. You can just keep learning and learning and learning and keep growing, and that's what makes it so fun. Don't worry about having to have all this information right now. Find you a resource. Find your resource that works well for you, and take that resource and start studying it. Start going through and learning from that point. Then you're going to expand. As you find, hey, I don't understand that. Hey, I don't really understand how this tech's working. You can then reach out, and then you're going to start growing and learning more information. As you go through and take different classes, they're going to give you different pieces of paper. That's when you can start building in your other library, your other information. This is over 25 years of learning for me. It's going to take you time, but as you go, you're going to build your own library. But never stop learning.